These crimes were respected in prison according to former prisoners, Viewers Edition.
Well, hi there. If you didn't watch the last couple videos from yesterday or whenever it was, look, I show my face now. I'm here. I'm real. I'm made of flesh and not some sort of advanced AI CGI thing, definitely. I did want to thank you all. I saw a lot of your comments, a lot about my mustache. People wondering why I don't have a big beard. It's the summertime, folks. It's hot outside. I need to stay light. Come wintertime, we're going to see that big old Kratos beard going, so just stick around. Also, I'm probably going to do like a little AMA, will Ask Me Anything, so if you have questions for me, ask them down in the comments. Comment me whatever question you want, and I'll pick some of my favorites, and who knows, maybe I'll answer that one question that y'all just can't stop friggin' asking. Anyway, let's do some stories about prison.
Hey folks, quick content warning here. We're talking about, hierarchies in prison. There will be some mention of aurists and pedophiles, stuff like that. Not any awful gruesome details, but if you're really sensitive to that stuff, you might want to keep it in mind. Story 1. My father flew from East to West Germany in the early 80s. Well, he was caught and nearly got shot in the head and was hit one time. A scar proves it. In prison, there were political and murderers mixed, which sound that the political were put in a pit of death, but they were actually respected. Some even got more respect than the murderers. My dad is not the type of guy you would think is strong and ready to beat the crap out of you. He is. He grew up in a pretty harsh household. His father, my grandpa, I sadly had very little contact to, ignored him in his teen years and would beat him up for lies his siblings told him. So he's pretty ready to fight if necessary. He once was in the situation where he was making coffee in his cell, and one of the followers of one of the murderers, who was a big name in the prison, knocked on the cell door and said, "If you don't open up and share something to us, I'll call the guards on you. I can smell that crap in the whole corridor." My dad wasn't having it and opened the door and slammed him against the wall, threatening to F him up big time if he even tries to call the guards. My father had no problems with them at all at this point. He told me as well, when they were transferred to the western border, they were asked if they really want to go west. If they do, they can never return to their families. Everybody agreed. When they left the bus, everybody would kiss the floor except my dad. He banged the floor. Not even 4 years after the Soviet Union collapsed and the border was opened. My father still hates it, spending 18 months in prison, and then a short time after it, the borders were no more. Effed up feeling. 10 or so years later, he was in a conversation with a lawyer, and my mom and spot on mocked the East German people and said they should rebuild the border. My mom is East German too and flew in 1989, just months before the wall was destroyed. She was successful with no prison time. The lawyer was in shock. My dad still has hate in him against the East, and in today's time, I've no need to tell you what he thinks about Russia. Honestly, the part of that story that maybe sticks with me the most is the fact that your dad was willing to beat the crap out of somebody because they demanded he share his coffee. If there's anything I can relate to more in this world, it's probably that, because if you try and take my coffee, I'm gonna, look at me. I'm not gonna do anything. I'm just gonna be like, no, please don't. Story 2. Bit of a long story here. Once a few years ago, I met a black, slightly older gentleman who worked as a janitor at McDonald's. Very nice, very easy to talk to. I asked him why he worked there. He said he had been in prison for double murder and had served a sentence of 25 years. It scared me a little when I heard that, but I didn't want to be rude, so I asked why he committed murder. It turns out that he had murdered 2 men who R-ed his 15-year-old daughter when she was on her way home from school. The reason he got 25 years and not life was because the 2 men had filmed the R, and that was enough evidence. My heart broke when I heard that, and it's one of my worst nightmares that my future daughter would be R'd. So I have a huge respect for this man. I called him a true hero, a wonderful father, and wished him all the luck in the world. He thanked me, but he was already happy because he didn't get any jobs after prison until he asked McDonald's restaurant for a job. Apparently, the restaurant manager was an R victim in her teens and sympathized with him and gave him a job as a janitor at the restaurant. I asked how life was in prison, and apparently he was highly respected by most of the inmates, and for a time he was a gang leader who made sure that pedophiles and other Rists had a hell of a time in prison. I asked what his name was, but I only remember his first name, Jonathan, but not his last name. Ever since then, I've had the idea of naming my future son Jonathan. I hope he has a good life to this day. Yeah, I mean, honestly, yeah, I'm not a violent person. Fans of the channel know that I tend to say, don't seek out violence, but there are situations where I really can't blame people. And in this situation, I absolutely can't blame that guy. I think if I was in his situation, I don't have kids, so I don't necessarily know, but no, I feel like I would. If I found out that someone close to me had that happen, I would want to get revenge. I know violence maybe wouldn't help things for them. It wouldn't make the world that much of a better place. I don't know. I don't know what I'd be thinking aside from just pure rage. So, yeah, I guess I can get it. Story 3. One of my uncles went to prison because he accidentally killed a friend's dad that was abusing his friend, in defense of his friend and himself. Obviously, he went to jail, but when he was released, we were all shocked to find that he was treated like a king in his sentence by both the guards and his fellow inmates. He would often have exclusive and fancy meals in the cafeteria, have a television and some of his possessions in his cell, as well as a friggin' WII, and when anyone went to visit him, guards would let him pick up a call no matter the moment. He was sentenced for about 2 years in jail, but for his good behavior, he got out in less than a year, about 8 months. But he said that from his time, he also saw a lot of things because it's prison, and he said that Rists and child/women murderers were profoundly despised. Story 4. My neighbor was in prison some 30 years ago as a young man. He was very introverted and very socially awkward, which made him get bullied most of his life. The incident that made him go to prison happened at work. He was working in a factory and his boss was harassing him daily, calling him an R, slapping him on the back of the head, ordering him to do heavy and dangerous work alone that required several workers. At one point, he just snapped and beat the living crap out of his boss, broke both of his knees with a big wrench, then went on to where they kept the money, took everything he could find, then he took the boss's car, a new Porsche, and went joyriding all over town. He went to the forest, crashed the car, and burned all the money. I think it was about 500,000 German marks at the time. The money he took was salary money, but he didn't care because no one ever stood up to him or helped him in any way. That's where the police found him. He was sentenced to 5 years, and he said that he was treated like a king by other inmates. I mean, can you blame the guy? Yeah, I mean, you can because he went to jail. Sure, you can blame the guy. But I think we've all had those kind of fantasies of, getting back at a really crappy boss. And so, I can sort of see it. I wouldn't encourage it. Folks, don't go get wild and violent on your boss to teach them a lesson just to end up and lose years of your life in jail. But, I mean, yeah. Story 5. My father's friend was accused of CP or even intercourse against children in the U.S. He told inmates he was wrongfully accused in a calm manner. Inmates confirmed that he is to be yet proven to be an offender, but in his case was not prioritized and spent years, then just got out a year ago after failing to find any solid evidence against him. Fearing for his life and being in the U.S. for too long, he just went back to his home country, didn't even file some compensation for time spent in custody. He just wanted it to be over with. Lost his wife during that time, but his 2 kids still love him more than their stepfather. Story 6. A friend of mine was in prison for breaking her partner's laptop over his head. She did so because she was using it and got curious about some files she'd never noticed before. They were hidden and just seemed suspicious. The files were filled with images and videos of CSA material. The way she tells it, She heard him raise the garage door, called the police, gave the address, hung up, and he got an extreme close-up of the laptop as it collided with his face and head and back and whatever other areas she could reach with it during the kerfuffle, as she refers to it. She said she never had issues with the officers or the prisoners. The general consensus was that she is a generally chill person who was there because the law is stupid sometimes. What she did is technically assault after all. And she got by pretty easily. But she did get a mild scolding from her arresting officer for continuing to knock him around with the laptop until the police got there, but got points for handing the laptop over and stopping when they got there. She was very matter-of-fact the whole time with everyone. Said she 100% rocked his crap with that laptop filled with horrors, would do it again if it happened again, and that she hopes he winces every time he sees a laptop for the rest of his life. But she understands that carries consequences, and she's willing to accept those consequences. He's still in prison. She's out and married to a wonderful guy who is fully aware of and in agreement with her CSA policy. Story 7. I legally, as a joke, changed my first name to Sir. My legal name is Sir Ezekiel Tyrus. 20 years ago, I got into a bar fight in the parking lot of a bar in Seattle. I'm a big dude covered with tattoos and booked me in for misdemeanor assault. The guards thought it was funny my first name was Sir, so while they were making fun of the other dudes in the county, they kept calling me Sir. You'd hear other people locked up saying, "He must be somebody because they keep calling him Sir." I was in the county for 7 days, charges dropped, but nobody ever made eye contact with me. I got up to use the toilet and people would walk the opposite way. When I was trying to sleep, I overheard one guy say, "He must be a high-ranking member of the Aryan Brotherhood or something because the guards are too respectful to him. And I think I remember seeing him when I was in Walla Walla." LOL. I love this. I love the idea that you would name yourself Sir and that would get you respect in prison. It does remind me, I remember when I was in my late teens, I had been thinking about legally changing my name, and as a joke I said the best first name would be Doctor, because then people would always have to refer to me as Dr. So-and-so, and I was really proud of that back then. And I think I'm still proud of it now. Story 8. My uncle is still in prison for a double homicide he committed before I was born. He was let out on bail in the 90s and went back almost immediately for several burglaries and an R, and hasn't been out since. He apparently gets treated with respect because he has a reputation for mostly being a chill and friendly guy, but absolutely will not hesitate to beat the crap out of you or try to kill you if you think he has a reason to, up to and including because he felt like it. Basically, convince other prisoners that I'm not locked in here with you, you're locked in here with me, and they'll all keep a cordial distance or try to be your buddy out of fear. He is getting older, though, and his health is declining with age, so his fear he instills in others is also declining. Story 9. A few years ago, a volunteering group that I was a part of went to prison to donate some books. I got to talk with a prisoner that was in charge of the prison library and asked him if there was some kind of social hierarchy. His answer was that gangs had well-defined borders and had trade and peace treaties. It was funny how he was talking about them like they were countries. And as someone who didn't mess around, no one messed around with him, so it was a relatively peaceful prison, but anyone with any kind of child-related crime had an average life expectancy of less than 2 weeks if left with the general population. And then he told me a story about how some years ago there was a scammer or drug dealer, I can't remember exactly what, that saw in the kid touchers a business opportunity. He basically gave them some protection, and in exchange, he would pimp the crap out of them to the other roommates for cigarettes, candy, and other smuggled stuff. From what I can remember, apparently he smooth-talked the other inmates with an argument/speech about death being a lenient punishment and giving the kid touchers a taste of their own medicine while having some fun themselves. Most guards acted like they didn't know a thing, but a few months later, they had to stop his business after a STD outbreak was discovered in the prison. Story 10. My dad went to jail for being a pedo, and it didn't surprise me that those crimes were hated the most. Though he was in a protected prison because we live in Australia. Even so, he tried to get out early and failed. He is out now. Served him time, and I can't see him till I'm 18. Watching this was interesting and filled me in on what it would have been like for him had he been in general prison. While he never did anything to me and treated me like I was an angel, he did stuff to my half-siblings, and eventually one of them cracked and told my mom. I still love him despite what he did, but that's only because he was a good dad, and truth be told, I am a daddy's kid. He's just a terrible stepfather. And I tend to joke about how he's a D to my friends that no, trust me, I have a lot of questions to ask him.
Okay, so this is not something that I would ever want to joke around about, because this person's dad is kind of a monster. But also it's their dad, and so, like, yeah, they say they can't hate him. I don't know what to think about that. I really genuinely don't, because I'm trying to put myself in their shoes. What if I found out that my dad had done something this awful? Could I still be like, but he's my father, and so, I still love him? Like, my initial reaction is to think, no, if I find that out, like, that changes my perspective completely. That person that's just one of those crimes that I'm a forgiving person to a pretty broad extent compared to a lot of folks, I think. But that's just one that it just doesn't sit well with me at all. I don't know, even after if he got rehabilitation and got all the help, if I could ever look at him the same and not just harbor this, like, disgust. And even I know that for a lot of those people, they're people with some severe mental problems who need therapy, and society makes it very hard. I've seen that in comments, and I've had a psychologist friend talk to me about that because it was something they were interested in researching. I get that, but once you've committed the crime, once you've done a thing, once you have crossed that line, I can't. I don't know. I really struggle with ever accepting forgiving that. And I don't know if that makes me a closed-minded person or not. Maybe it does. I'd really, this comment's going on forever, but I would actually really love to hear what you all have to say in the comments about this one, because I'm sorry. If you cross that line, like, you're just kind of a monster to me now. I don't know.
Story 11. I used to work in a prison as a CO. There were a lot of times inmates would try asking about other inmates and their charges because they knew I knew what they were. In general, I wouldn't give any information because I'm not interested in internal politics. They would know in 5 minutes regardless of what I said or did, so it made no difference to me. One thing you have to understand is that some officers will get revenge on inmates by being slow to react. I've seen inmates getting taken out of dorms on stretchers because the officer assigned to the dorm simply didn't call emergency traffic as soon as an incident occurred. By far, the most incidents I had to respond to were gang-related, but the worst incidents I responded to were the result of chomos being put in general population. Story 12. Okay, so after about 5 minutes of the same thing being repeated, I'm going to post one that's actually interesting. I have a buddy who's a guard, and at his prison, there's a professional mafia hitman who's been there for some 30 years. Rumor has it he's killed over 300 people. Among inmates, he's feared by some, respected by others, and completely untouched by all. He's on a complete do not touch list. One new guy started talking crap, and other prisoners literally dragged him away and explained who this guy was. He's that respected among inmates. According to my friend, he's a nice guy, though. Doesn't mean violence on anyone. Frequently says, it was just a job.
It's nice to have one that's a little more lighthearted about a person who supposedly killed 300 people. How lighthearted and fun. Delightful. I do like the kind of, like, murderer, scary guy stereotype of just being like, it was just a job. Like, as much as I'm like, no, we were taking lives, that's terrible, and I would absolutely, like, not be able to quite get over that. But in the fantasy of my head, in a book, I enjoy the character who's just like, yeah, I killed 100 people, but hey, it's just a job.
Story 13. I can personally speak on my experience, and I had to do time for drug possession, manufacturing, maintaining a dwelling, possession with intent, 147 counts of peripheral. They wanted me to roll my guy, and I ran. I was on the run for 6 months before I got tired of it and turned myself in. I didn't have any problem with anyone, but I'm humble, and I try to stay out of the limelight. I think that's what was the proof of my crimes. I never had a problem, and honestly, some respect was given to me because I'm white and was moving products in what most people would call the projects or the ghetto. This is just my story, though. Story 14. Lots of questions come up in my mind about this subject, specifically on the bad charges. Not defending any of the criminals here. They all likely deserve the punishment given by the courts unless they are truly innocent. But how is it the same prisoners who challenged the validity of the accusations against themselves suddenly trust the system got the charges correct on other prisoners? How can some seemingly respect a murderer whose victim is dead more than an criminal whose victim at least got to live on? Why do they suddenly think they, a criminal, have the moral high ground to judge anyone else? Is it snitching to help law enforcement prevent or investigate harm to innocent bystanders if you have knowledge that would help them? What if your best friend was murdered by a gang and you saw who did it? Could you tell the police? It's like people who live in a dangerous neighborhood perpetuate the problem by silencing themselves and not aiding the very people that society employs to make the neighborhood safer. It just makes no sense to me. Story 15. I was in prison in Austria, and it's exactly as the video shows. CPs, arrests, and child-related offenders get beat up or worse, but I didn't experience that. There was one CP in solitary, and there were 20 cells on one floor. Normally, the wardens lock his door so he won't get assaulted by the inmates while he's outside of his cell. One day, the warden decided to unlock the door. I guess someone tipped him off. So as you can imagine, all 19 inmates went into his cell and beat the crap out of him. Wardens didn't do anything about it. Story 16. Random thought. Went to prison for con objection in a country with mandatory military service, immediately went on hunger strike, was in solitary for 4 days, and they brought lots of food every day. I continued to refuse. They said since my situation isn't degrading fast, they'll send me back to general population. I got a job peeling logs outside midwinter, worked without food for 2 to 3 weeks, then finally couldn't do any more work without food, consistently went to the lunch line to get the desserts and handed them out to anyone that wanted them or asked first in the day. Then when I got news that my case was up for review, I started eating again and got back to work. Then one day I was coming back from work and was told by one of the higher-ups, "Notice when you started, you were the last one in the line to the lunch queue. Now you're like fourth from the first. Keep that in mind." I think it's not about what you do. Con objectors are universally hated in this country. It's how you act while inside. I did normal work, zero food for 3 weeks, so yeah, there are ways to earn your place no matter how hated you are. Fat percentage was 5 to 6% when I ended my hunger strike, and bed rest BPM was 160. Those details were in my file. It was an interesting time.
This one's really interesting to me. I think a little bit of it's lost in translation. I don't fully grasp every concept going on here, but yeah, this idea that, you know, the work that you're doing, how you're acting inside early on, like setting a precedent of how people are thinking of you, the hunger striking. It's interesting. I don't fully know what to take from this. Like I said, I feel like a little bit is lost in translation with whatever country this is coming from. But interesting read. I would genuinely like to know more. Hey, if you're if you're watching this one and you want to elaborate more in the comments, I'd love to hear more.
Story 17. I went in about 20 to 15 years ago in Australia for something minor and ended up in maximum jail for a few months before going to easy jail. Things may have changed since then, and I guess a year is a short, limited experience. Child offenders will get you put in a protection wing. They are the most hated. S offenders are also not respected, but you probably won't get stabbed in the neck in the first half hour. Snitching, as the Americans say, will put you in the child offense category, and you may get moved into protection. There's no respected crimes, and there are no gangs or racial groups per se. You get respect if you can get stuff or assault a guard. Otherwise, it's level pegging. Story 18. Oddly, a series of single-handed, unarmed bank robberies seemed to earn me enough respect that I didn't have to fight all that much. 3 fights in 4 years, and all with jitterbugs who were too new to the neighborhood to know how things worked yet. It's a strange world on the inside. One thing that needs to be said, sorry to bust a myth, but people who victimized women and children, especially SAs and child arrests/murderers, targeted them more largely for the same reasons the homeless, drug addicts, and prostitutes are targeted on the streets. Authorities don't get too worked up over crimes committed against unsympathetic victims. Society will care less about identifying and punishing you too harshly if they don't really give a crap about your victim. It isn't so much an honor-driven thing as it is a lower odds of getting much, if any, time added to your sentence for having some fun effing someone up kind of thing.
Well, this one's a little depressing in some ways, kind of goes against the idea that there is some sort of moral structure that's hanging on in prison where the people guilty of the more heinous crimes are the ones targeted and taken on by the prison population, a sort of justice going on within the prison system, I guess. But according to this person, not so much. It's just that you can do more bad things and not get in trouble for it. I don't know. Is there anyone else who's been to prison here? Do you share these sentiments, or is it truly this kind of sad and depressing? I mean, I'm never thrilled to hear about people getting, beat up and stabbed in prison for any reason. I don't take joy in violence, but I at least wanted to have the solace of knowing that, hey, they might be locked up, but they still care about certain moral standards. I don't know. Interested to hear what folks have to say.
Story 19. COs have kids and a lot of family in there have kids. A lot of us have been in and out, have been affected by a CM at some point in our younger lives, and it screwed us up. Right. Look at us. Why would we willingly let that happen to another child or ours, plus what happened to us as kids? I'll never get to ask the teacher, why me? Why did you pick me to do this too? Why do I still have night terrors at almost 40 years old? What made it worth it? But now we're grown-ups, and it has a face, and it's in our cage with us, in our face. We finally have a chance to give them everything they gave us as children, that fear, that feeling of pure uncomfort. And you can't do anything about it but take it to the people that are supporting this kind of stuff nowadays. You have no idea what you're doing. Story 20. All I can say after reading this, not too different from Russia. Our prisons and jails have much crappier food and living conditions. Also, prisoners have to address a CO as citizen chief, and Supermax prisons have a nasty custom of seagull walking the prisoners there, which is really hurtful and humiliating. But regarding which crimes are respected and which are not, it's 100% matching. Arrests, pedophiles are almost certain to get gang-ard and join the cast of the Untouchables. The roosters, or put-downed ones, no one should ever give them a handshake or else you'll also be made one. Also, the Russian term for a snitch literally translates as a knocker. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.